My name is Eric Randich, and I've been retained by Michelle & Associates to do an independent and objective scientific review of the church paper that makes the conclusion that ammunition is the principal source of lead exposure for the condors. I'm a metallurgist, so I approach this from an industrial lead standpoint and from an isotope ratio standpoint, and what could we do with these tools. Can I have my slides up there, please? Let's see. The key points that I'd like to bring up today are several, and they're outlined in my report, that the lead used for ammunition can't really be distinguished from the lead that's used in any other lead-containing product. That includes fishing sinkers, lead wheel weights, brass. Most of the brasses out there are free machining brasses that for plumbing parts and screws, they contain 0.5% to 7% lead. Secondly, industrial lead has a much greater isotope ratio range than that shown by the church. They used a very selected and small portion of the data to represent the ammunition. Church also used incomplete environmental background data from their own references, and further, they ignored one of their references on lead ammunition. Isotope ratios alone cannot be used to address the likelihood that one lead source is the principal source or preferred source over another lead source. The forensic community does not use isotope ratios in courts of law for good reason. It can only be used to exclude and say they didn't come from the same lead source. But there's so many lead sources that have the same isotope ratio that you can't use it in a court of law. This is the figure 1 from the church article, which summarizes what they've done. They plot the level of the blood, or the level of the lead in the condor blood here versus the isotope ratio for the 207, 206. They have environmental lead at a relatively high number, 0.83, 0.84. We'll call it 83, 84. And their 19 bullets are over here at the 80 to 82 level. They draw a line and say, hey, as the blood level goes up, it approaches this low ammunition cluster over here from this high cluster over here. But the question that I came upon was, is this an accurate representation? And the answer is no. The actual ranges for industrial lead, if one looks into the forensic literature and the leaded gas industry, anything you'd like, look at the numbers here. Here's the forensic literature for ammunition: 76 to 86, 79 to 91, 85 to 103, 83 to 94. Look at 30 years of leaded gasoline. This is the tetraethyl lead that comes from the same lead smelters that make the ammunition. 81 to 86. You can't tell ammunition lead from any other lead coming from the same smelter. So why did Church use only 80 to 82 for the ammunition rather than true range? I don't know. If you look at the whole range for ammunition that's available in California today, it goes from 910 to 760. This whole range, not just this little cluster. So that's the real range over here. Again, if we look at the data for background from their reference Errol presented 15 data points, not just the 2 that Church used. Look at the numbers for 78 for the water, 77 to 80 for soil, whole rocks, 81 to 82. If you look at that and use the real environmental background data, it's this red line that's way off scale down here. So now we're faced with drawing a line from this cluster of data to this cluster of data, and you can see that you cannot draw a curvilinear line like this. It makes no sense. You could draw a line going up, going down, or straight across because it all overlaps. In other words, they used very selected information from their references. They did not give an accurate representation of their own references, and that's unforgivable. In summary, the actual data, and you can read this in reports, of background environmental lead and industrial leads are much larger than reported by Church. They do completely overlap, and rightly so. In fact, the 2 background data points they used were industrial lead caused, and that's explained in the Errol paper itself. If you do use complete and representative data, you cannot support the Church mathematical model, and you cannot support their conclusion that it's the principal source. It's just not defendable. It's an untenable conclusion, gentlemen. Thank you.
Doctor, just one question. You said you were hired by a law firm to do an independent and objective review of a peer-reviewed paper. Can you tell
Yes.
us where your rebuttal was published and what peer-reviewed journal you published your rebuttal?
I have not published it yet. I was employed about, it's August, I was employed in the middle of July. This was basically a 2.5-week effort. We do plan to publish in the future, but yeah, this was just a recent.
I hope when you do publish in a peer-reviewed journal that you'll send us a copy of that paper.
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Okay, we have Dr. Don Saba, who has time ceded to him. He'll have 4 minutes, followed by Virginia Hanley, followed by Damon Nagami. I'm sorry if I got that name wrong. Dr. Saba.
Could I have my slides put up? Good afternoon. It's been 2 years since I last stood before you, and it's been 2 years since Commissioner Sutton challenged me to publish my data and get it peer-reviewed. I did exactly that. I published my reservations about the church paper. They were peer-reviewed, and they were accepted. They were published in the year 2008 of February, and that data has been submitted. That publication has been submitted. You all have seen it. Today I'd like to revisit the church paper and to talk about some critical omissions of data in that paper. These omissions are so critical that they virtually destroy the basic premise of that paper. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, the omission of data that I'm referring to here, I've got two quotations here. Notice now that the church paper was published in 2006. I'm referring here to an email between Dr. Robert Riseborough and Dr. Don Smith. These are the authors of the church paper. An email made in December of 2004, and here's another report by one of the Robert Riseborough in 2005. Here we say, the email says, we put together a spreadsheet with all the information we have about the birds for which we have blood isotope ratios. First, we might exclude the two samples with ratios higher than either background or ammunition, attributing them to some other source. Subsequently, Dr. Riseborough says, for the other two suspected lead deaths, number 175 and number 181, the ratios were 0.89 and 0.86 respectively. Regarding both of these birds, Dr. Riseborough wrote that those values were much higher than those recorded in the ammunition samples, and that in each case, lead exposure cannot be attributed to an ammunition source. So, excuse me, I shouldn't have done that so fast. So what we're talking about here is this. Two birds are suspected to have died from lead. These deaths cannot be attributed to lead, and they're talking about excluding this data from the church report. How can this be? Well, here is the critical data that is included in the church report. We don't find this data included here. And here we have the church report in all its glory. And here again, to recap, these green dots are condors in captivity. They have an isotopic ratio in this range of 830 to 835. The basic premise of the church paper is that as you release condors into the wild, they begin to accumulate lead, as you can see here going to the right. And the premise is that these yellow triangles here represent the blood lead of these condors. As they are released and they begin to accumulate lead, the premise is that as the condors begin to accumulate lead, their blood isotopic ratios begin to approach that of ammunition. That's the linchpin right there. And the problem is right here. If you include the omitted data is way off scale from the church paper. Here's 0.86 for one dead condor. Here's 0.89 for another dead condor. These dead condors have blood lead concentrations far in excess of the church data. Remember, these church birds here were living birds in the wild. These birds are dead. They have really high concentrations of lead in their blood. They have really high isotopic ratios, well beyond the reported ammunition values in the church paper. Had these two pieces of data been revealed when the church paper was published, it would have been rejected. Had these two pieces of data been reported to you when these church authors stood before you they would have never been able to make the conclusion that ammunition is the principal source of lead in the blood of condors. And so I just, in summary, want to say that we really have to be careful when we look at data presented to us. This is a case where data was excluded, absolutely critical data, and it is so misleading that this paper simply cannot be relied upon. This paper is meaningless. And I just want to say one final thing. I appreciate your allowing me to say this. That I'm not trying to say that a person should be castigated for this or should be feel embarrassed about this. This is a very complicated issue. In order to be conversant in this issue, a person has to have expertise in chemistry. A person has to have expertise in metallurgy. A person has to have expertise in biology, and a person has to have expertise in forensic sciences. Very few people have that level of expertise, and so it's understandable that someone would make a mistake like this. Thank you for indulging. If there are any questions, I'd certainly be willing to answer anything. Thank you.